hello and welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast, as we hear from a wide range of Aussie Christian leaders as well as global guests when it comes to fulfilling the Great Commission and church planting and all things of what it means to reach Australia. And today we're joined by Madison Bothe. Madison heads up Circuit Riders. She's based in Perth. Madison, it's so great to have you on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks so much, Charlie. I'm so honoured to be here. So excited. Yeah, I can't wait to dive in and have a chat.
So good. Well, hey, first tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about your life. I mentioned that you're obviously in Perth. How did you find yourself in Perth? Give us a bit of an overview of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I am currently in Perth, Western Australia. I've been here for 3 years. I have the absolute privilege of being a part of Tribes Church. I'm on the executive team for Tribes, and to even give a short little backstory of what actually happened or how I ended up in Perth is originally I'm actually from Queensland. I'm an East Coast girl, Sunny Coast represent. And 7 years ago now, which I can share a little bit more about it, but I joined Circuit Riders. And Circuit Riders is our missions base in California, in Huntington Beach. So I've been doing missions for 7 years out in the States. And a little thing called COVID happened in 2020. And due to COVID and some crazy visa issues, unfortunately, I was sent back to Australia. But now I know it wasn't an unfortunate thing. The Holy Spirit really had set up the whole entire thing. But 5 months, I was actually stuck in America. When my visa we didn't know what was going to happen to it. And basically I was told I needed to leave the country to go back to Australia. But in 5 months of planes being delayed, not being able to get to Australia, not even knowing what God had next for me, I actually started praying at that time because I didn't know anything about tribes. But I started praying, God, you're sending me back to Australia. God, what are you asking me to pray right now? Or what are you wanting to speak? And I kept hearing the word, start praying for your tribe, start praying for your tribe. So I start praying this random prayer for 5 months. And then I have a beautiful leader in Circuit Riders. She just gave me a word and she said, Madison, there's new places and new faces waiting for you. And with that, combined with praying for my tribe, to keep it short, I ended up in hotel quarantine, finally getting to Perth. Sorry, not even Perth. I was only in Sydney at that time and locked up in hotel quarantine, $3,000, just sitting there waiting to be released. And that's when, by divine connection, my friend from America had texted me about Cody and Chantel Byrne, my beautiful pastors now who are church planning in Western Australia. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, I think there's something on this. I reached out to them. They end up crying. We end up on a FaceTime. And long story made super short, 3 years ago, stepped off the plane to Western Australia, never been here in my life, and now I'm a part of Tribes.
Wow. Oh, that's quite incredible, yeah. Madison, and just the way that
it's you really
found yourself in a brand new city. And of course, we're going to get to some of the work with Circuit Riders today as well, because you find yourself all around Australia. It's not only Perth, and while that is your current home. But tell us a little bit about what drew you to missions, evangelism. Of course, you ended up in the US. You were part of the schools and what Circuit Riders was doing out of California. And of course, we're going to get to today how integral, obviously, missions is to church planting, and that being the very heart of what we're all doing when we talk about church planting. But just tell us, how did that come about for you? Tell us some of the stories that led you to how you got involved.
Yeah, it is really wild. I look back at my life now, I'm like, God, you really are weaving this storyline together. I have always loved Jesus. I come from a very interesting background, though, just with my parents having a very messy marriage and divorce, and a lot more to that story. But I've always grown up loving Jesus, even with my mum committing to the faith when my parents divorced and my dad not. I just have always loved Jesus and really found him even in high school after being like, do I follow my mum? Do I follow my dad? So I've always burned for Jesus. I would always have loved him deeply. But when I was about to graduate high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. All I knew, I had 3 Ps, I say, either a personal trainer, a pastor or a paramedic. I was kind of like, I don't know, what do I do? Like, I just was kind of all over the place. And all my friends had this very clear, like, I'm going to go to uni or I'm going to go to this. And I just didn't know. The only thing that I knew is that I loved Jesus and I loved people, and it'd broken my heart a lot for people, and especially to see them saved. And so with that, I finished high school on the Sunshine Coast. I was serving in my church, serving at a youth ministry. And then we actually had a random ministry from America come. And this lady just one time gave me this word at this service and said, Madison, I see you going to college campuses and fire of the Holy Spirit sweeping through these campuses. And funnily enough, I'd already started dreaming a little bit about America. Now I know it was the Lord and his prompting. But on that word at 19, I tried to leave the country. I tried to go to all different ministries in America, anyone doing anything for Jesus on university campuses. And funnily enough, college campuses, I knew it was America because we call it uni, obviously. And then at 19, I had this word that I'd go to college campuses. But crazy enough, the Lord actually started speaking to me at that point when I was trying to leave Australia. And he said, Madison, the grass isn't greener on the other side. He said, I want you to stay committed and planted in Australia, and I want you to grow. And through a very long, different, I guess to keep the story short, let's say that, is that I became a youth pastor. I went to Bible college. I did all these different things. And then at the age of 26, I'd been waiting since 19 for this word to be fulfilled. I met a girl. I was a part of Planet Shakers in Melbourne for a season, love Shakers. And I was really planted down in Melbourne, and I thought I was going to stay there. And then at this conference, our big annual conference at Planet Shakers, I met this girl. She'd just seen the circuit riders in Kona, Hawaii, and we ended up, it was a very random connection, ended up getting talking. And from there, 3 months later, I'd booked a flight to California. It was the Lord. I checked in with accountability and leadership, and they're like, Madison, this is time. And so from 19, I'd been holding on this word, and from there have been in missions ever since. So bit of a long-winded story, but it's been a crazy, crazy journey. But that's how, and originally how I stepped into missions at the age of 26.
So good. Well, hey, you mentioned, obviously, you're here today representing circuit riders now in Australia. For those who are hearing of circuit riders for the very first time, like, we're going to jump into some of the things that you're doing around Australia. And of course, you've alluded to the fact that you're so passionate about campus ministry and about young adults and the next generation, which I think is a very significant part of what the Lord is doing currently around Australia. But tell us about the history of circuit riders. What is it? What is the idea? Where's it come from? Help us get our bearings about what it's all about before we hear more about what's happening in Australia.
Yeah, amazing. It's the funniest thing when someone hasn't heard about circuit riders. They either think we ride bikes or we're in the circus. So we're not any of those, though we love that. And I'm sure someone on listening maybe wants to start something in the circus or riding bikes. But circuit riders, very simply put, it's like the circuit riders of old, like John Wesley, Asbury, Charles Finney. The circuit riders of old, which were Methodist preachers, preaching the simple and radical gospel all across America, all across Europe, back in the early 1800s. And they would see God move in great power. And so years ago now, I wasn't a part of the original team, but years ago, there was a word that came that we would be like the circuit riders of old that preach the simple gospel, that in purity and integrity, everything is simply about Jesus, and bringing it back to who he is and seeing him move in power, not only with salvation, but seeing also people healed and catalyzed into action. And so years ago, about 13, 14 years ago, Circuit Riders was established. And now we are a missions base in Huntington Beach in California. And we really have a heart to, number one, save the lost, to revive the saved, and then to train them all. And so that's just the short snapshot of Circuit Riders.
I love that. What a vision. That's something I think hopefully all of us as followers of Jesus and leaders in God's church can get passionate about, because particularly here in Australia, of course, we want to see that, and for all of the world, but in our own backyard.
Yes.
And so as Tell me some of like how you got started in Australia, because it's relatively young in Australia. Am I right? And therefore, how has that
Yes,
looked?
correct.
What's it beginning to look like as you kind of mobilizing other people for the purpose of evangelism and mobilization and I guess catalyzing and releasing people into mission?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good question with a very long story attached, but to keep it relatively short, I was talking before about that season of COVID where I was really locked in America. I couldn't get back home. And I'm going to be just really vulnerable and transparent. I thought I was going to be living in California in America with the circuit riders. Long term, indefinitely, we were looking at switching my visa for me to have a bit more permanency in America. But the Lord really had a new assignment for me. And so 3 years ago, when I was really crying out to the Lord and asking Him, hey, God, what are you doing in my life? I'm so confused. I was, I guess you could say, doing my height of ministry in America. I'd reached so many campuses for Jesus out there. And I had that word from 19. I really knew that God was calling me to America. But then, as we are believers who follow Jesus, there was an invitation that the Lord put on the table. And He started speaking to me about Moses. And the story of Moses was really highlighted throughout this COVID and visa journey. And He started speaking about how Moses, at the time of his life, where He started speaking to him, that burning bush moment of, I hear the cries of my people. I hear them. I hear the cries. And I started talking to the Lord about Moses and letting Him speak to me. And He said, Madison, I really hear the cries of my people in Australia. He said, just like Moses, I want to send you back. And I really want you, everything that you've learned here in America, I want you to take this back because there's people waiting, not only for the gospel, which is number one, we want to see everyone saved, but number two, there are people who are like believers waiting to be activated, and they need a permission slip basically. And so with that, and just really feeling that prompting like Moses to go to my own people, I hopped on the plane, obviously ended up in Perth, Western Australia. And then now for the last, give or take 3 years, have been pioneering. So it is very early days. We officially have last year and then this year have done our first two tours across the nation of Australia and then also New Zealand. And then now we've just completed, actually, that's why my voice is a little bit strained at the moment, is because we've just finished two schools now in Perth, Western Australia, activating uni students, young adults, and believers to be missional in whatever context God's calling them to be. So it's a very short version of how it all started. And then the extra layer to that is being very committed to the local house and seeing God, how can we then, as circuit riders and as me now leading this and having the privilege to do that, how can we, when we travel, actually really radically bless, add fuel to the fire to what God's already doing in local cities, and then actually see people really planted from that space, should I say, then being catalyzed into action and then being mobilized. So have a real heart for both. And so early days, but we've been seeing God move in great power. And I've just been so privileged to work with incredible leaders and pastors from our nation.
So good. Well, Madison, like, I think it's fair to say, and this is not a hopefully a negative thing, but like it feels to me like one of the great opportunities in Australia is campus ministry, and it's maybe been one of the most overlooked parts of our societies when it comes to reaching particularly young adults with the gospel. And so I think that's why hearing what you're doing is so exciting, because of course there have been wonderful examples of that around the country, and yet it is one of those great blind spots for the church. And I would just have to guess that may be one of the things that the Lord is really trying to get our attention with is young adults, Gen Z, campus ministry.
Yes.
The opportunities and the harvest are just plentiful there. And like, I guess for someone who's just hearing about the work that you're doing for the first time, like what do those tours, what do those schools look like in terms of training and equipping people to be able to reach their campus or to reach their friends? What does that look like?
Yes. So I guess the easiest way to describe it is Circuit Riders is like our name. It's like the umbrella. And then from that, we have different lanes. And so one of our lanes is tours. In America, we've toured all 50 states of America and reached thousands of campuses for Jesus. And so on that tour, it's called Carry the Love, and it's two punches. It's number one, we have a gospel night called Carry the Love, where hosts on the ground, so uni students, book out a lecture theatre. It's very simple. It's a lot of work, but it's very simple. Book out a lecture theatre on their campus, invite every believer that they know, and then all those believers invite the lost. And then we preach the gospel very simply. We share the good news of Jesus and that he died to have a relationship with these incredible students. And then from there, we see God move in power. People get saved. I have so many stories of suicides being interrupted, healings breaking out. And then from that place, as well as the gospel being preached, then we stay on campus or in that city and we do training. So we do, at the moment, we've just pioneered across Australia something called Greenhouse, which is our prayer room from California. Now, we're not expecting people to call it Greenhouse long term. It's just the name we have. People can use whatever name they want, but really the initiative is to train people how to pray and how to worship and how to intercede on their campuses or in their cities. Then the second part is evangelism, training believers on campus how to share the simple gospel. I think for me, what's broken my heart a lot over the current years has been a lot of people know the gospel, like, put your hand up, give your life to Jesus, but to actually articulate it very simply to someone on the street or on their campus, people don't know how. And so we just break down the gospel really simply. We do training. We go out with them as well. So it's like we're, doing it all together. We're such a family. And so with that, there's the gospel presentations, there's training with prayer at the moment. There's also that evangelism training. And then with pastors and leaders and uni students as well, we've been doing a lot of culture shift as well of like, what does it look like to bring a different culture, which is the culture of the kingdom, to these different areas. So some of the cultures we go after is like unbelief to faith, or what it looks like to be a radical servant in every single sphere of influence that you're in, like Jesus came to serve. And so we're just finding that so many people are either getting saved and God meeting them that way, or the other side is that people are getting equipped to actually go. And so I think for me, gone are the days where everyone just looks at the pastor or the leader. It's really just saying, hey, everyday believer, you are a disciple. God is calling you. And how can we then come in humbly and actually train you to go out and win your world and whatever sphere of influence you're in for Jesus. So that's a very simple, hopefully overarching view of what it is.
I love that. And I think particularly organisationally, we would join with you in saying that maybe the greatest impediment in our country is actually everyday men and women realising that's not for the professional Christian or pastor as much as we honour and celebrate our leaders. It's for everyday men, women, children, teenagers, college students, that actually which again, it's not simplistic, it is simple, but if we actually kind of get that passion for the lost and evangelism and the simple, basic, reproducible skills that we can all be trained in, that's something we can all be a part of. And I wonder, this is a bit off the cuff, I wonder from your experiences both in the US, but also as you're beginning to pioneer circuit riders in Australia, what are some of the biggest impediments that you're finding for people when it comes to sharing their faith? Like when it comes to training and equipping people, is it fear of man? Is it attitude? Like, tell us about some of the things that you would think would get in the way for most people.
Yeah, it's so good. I insert myself into the story. It's, for everyday believer, fear, number one, is that fear is really real. It's a spirit and really wants to stop and hinder Christians being a light. We really obviously, not obviously, but we really want to share the gospel motivated by love. So I think even stripping back that, hey, before we even go out, number one, we've got to break agreement with fear, but also we want to do it motivated by love. And so I think a lot of times is that when we train. I even just did the training at the school this week. And my first message that I opened up with was that intimacy with Jesus is the flame to the catalyst. Like, intimacy is a thing that's going to actually help us, because then we're motivated by love. So I think number one is we're breaking fear. Number two, it's that young people, whoever it is, sharing their faith. It's actually heading to the secret room and getting God's heart. Where I think sometimes we just have so much on our plates. We have so much that we're doing. So sometimes distraction can be there. But I know for me, when I share Jesus, it's because I've lent into his heart and then I've gone out. And so we've been breaking fear. We've been really encouraging people to step greater into the secret place to get God's heart. And to be honest, I think sometimes as well, it's just apathy. It's just a bit of complacency. It's like, do we really need to go? Like, can we just stay in the four walls of the church? And so we're really seeing a generation rise up, though, that it's actually saying, no, we want to go win the world. We want to win our families. We want to share Jesus, which lands me to my fourth point. Is just sometimes people aren't equipped. And so that's why with all of that, we are trying to see more people trained. And we just did a training school this last week. And I mean, I had girls and guys sitting with me crying, just being like, I've always wanted to share, but no one sat with me and showed me how. And so I think there's just, with even those four things, I could share a lot more. But I think it's actually just as leaders of our nation saying, hey, we'll sit with you and we'll train you and we'll do it with you. And they're probably the 4 points that I would hit on
that's
first.
so good. And not to kind of go down a rabbit hole at all, but from an exponential perspective, one of the great things that Dave Ferguson, who's the founder of Exponential, talks about is like the 5 steps of apprenticeship. And often we think we're too sophisticated in terms of actually doing what Jesus did, which was actually showing his apprentices how to do it, talking about it, putting them in the place of doing it, and then talking about it and debriefing, and then actually sending them out to go likewise. Like it's very simple but not simplistic, but often we don't actually take the time to talk people through it in order to be able to mobilize, capitalize, and send out. But Matt, you've just talked about the training school, and offline before we hit record on this podcast, you were just saying there were some amazing stories that came from that time. And I just love just to kind of throw you for a moment to just tell us about what the Lord did, tell us about some stories that came out of that time together.
Oh, absolutely. I'm still processing. It was so much in the best way. We had about 79 students. And what we mean by students, it's young adults, uni students from our nation. We had a few come from New Zealand and just a couple of students come also from across the world, which is pretty wild. But at this school, we went really deep. We went really, really deep in just going after the heart of Jesus. And from that, training and equipping them, obviously. But from all these trainings that we were doing, the Holy Spirit was just moving in great power. I'd say power really marked this school. We had one girl, we did a healing call at one of our nights, and this girl had come with a moon boot on, and she'd text me earlier that week saying, Madison, I'm still coming to the school, but I want to let you know I've had a really bad accident. I'm in a moon boot right now, and I might find it a bit hard walking all the time, so might just need some help. We do a healing call one of the nights, and Jesus just moved, and we prayed once for her, nothing happened, prayed twice. I don't think anything happened the third time. You just hear this eruption as she's taking off her moon boot, completely healed, to the point she had only brought her right shoe. She didn't bring the left shoe to the circuit rider school. And so she takes off this moon boot. She is like jumping up and down, just being like, Madison, everyone, like, look what God has done. And so not only did she get healed, she threw away the moon boot. She had to go get her left shoe. And so God really just moved in power, and that was so beautiful. We had a beautiful girl. She's so amazing. But, this is a generation where we're living with right now. Is 2 weeks ago, she actually was about to commit suicide. She'd gotten really, really deep in depression, and we prayed for her in the name of Jesus, and we said, be healed and depression leave. And she said the only way to describe it, and she grabbed my shoulder, she said it felt like a blanket was pulled off my shoulders that night. And she is glowing. She was full of joy. She said, I've never felt this much joy in all my life. So that was 2 stories. And then the last one is that baptisms broke out. And I mean, the presence of the Lord was so thick where 5 people wanted to get baptized. And by the end, I think about 10 or 11 had jumped in saying, you know what, I need to get baptized tonight. I need to just tell everyone publicly that I'm going to follow Jesus for the rest of my life. And I mean, the tears were flowing. Someone from the community that we were staying with, they do know Jesus as a family. The 8-year-old girl came back to her dad and was like, the presence of God is here. Like, what is happening right now? And so, all glory to Jesus. But he was just meeting people just everywhere throughout the school. And also we had a chance of going out and evangelizing, and we saw people saved. Some people had never shared the gospel for the first time. So I think the school just creates a spot for Jesus to move, and then young adults, students to get equipped and to be bold in their faith. So it was incredible. I'm still processing, but all glory to Jesus.
So good, Madison. And listen, like, if that can't get you pumped, having young adults in the life of your church getting fired up, loving Jesus, wanting to share them with their uni friends, colleagues, or whatever it might be, that is the heart of God for the next generation. And I hope that's something we can all get excited about as we listen on to some of those stories. And I'd love, just before I ask you one final question, how can people connect more with Circuit Riders? If they're hearing about it for the first time, going, I've got a bunch of young adults in my church that I'd love to get involved with this, or maybe they want to connect more as a church by way of kind of learning some of the work that you're doing, where can people go and check that out in order to be connected?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We have a few ways. Number one, our main website is just circuitriders.com. You can fill out a form there and just say, hey, I'd love to connect with Madison from the Australia team. We have so many teams across the globe out. So if you mention my name or mention Circuit Riders Pacific or Australia, that will come to me. We have our Instagram, Circuit Riders Pacific. Follow us, follow the journey. And then another way is old school email, just circuitriderspacific@gmail.com. Or actually it's circuitriders.com. Yes, circuitriders.com. And you can come and connect with us. But had to remember, I was like, Gmail or Circuit Riders.
All good. You've come off a big week. It's understood that you're a little bit tired.
I know. I'm still coming off it. I feel jet lagged, even though I'm in my own nation.
Well, hey, finally, Madison, I'd love to just ask you, like, obviously you've got a huge heart for evangelism, huge heart for the next generation. You are a fired up young woman. You're wanting to serve Jesus with all your heart. Tell us about your hopes and dreams for the Australian church, for reaching the lost. Of course, from an exponential perspective, we come from, when more people get saved, we're just going to have to keep planting more churches, and we know that's God's desire. And the Great Commission comes from disciple making, planting churches. But tell us, for you, what makes you come alive? What's your big dream for the church in Australia?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, I burn for it. I burn that the Church of Australia, number one, would truly, authentically, just afresh meet Jesus and get his heart, and just really know that, I'm a part of a church. It's sometimes a day in and the day out of, services and connect groups and everything, but just really authentically, again, just meeting him afresh, and from that place, just getting his heart, to go out and to actually move outside of the 4 walls. Obviously, the 4 walls are so important of the church. We need it. We need to gather. We need to meet. I am definitely so committed to the house. But at the same time, all those people that are meeting and gathering, God has an assignment, a missional field for them, whether that is in their local community. We often say it's either neighborhoods or nations. Like, it doesn't matter. God has something for everyone. And so my heart would be that each believer would then be equipped and given full permission to go out and do that thing. And so then, even just on a practical note, I would love to see prayer houses established. I'd love to see regular evangelism happening through the local church, because everything we do as Circuit Riders is so amazing, but we're only to be the spark to what God's already doing. Like, we need these local houses, they're present, and so we filter everyone back into the local house. But long term, I'd love to see those people who have been trained and equipped either by us or other ministries to come back into the local house, really go after it in prayer and intercession, because that's going to then fuel evangelism in each spot. And then obviously we want to see campuses, university campuses, high schools, one for Jesus. So if a church could adopt a campus and a high school, I just wonder what would happen to Australia even in 5 years. So
come on, I think that's word in season, and I know you and many others, other great ministries as well, are really trying to encourage churches to be passionate about, the mission field it is on their doorstep, whether it be schools, whether it be campus ministries. So many amazing, opportunities all around us. And so, Maddison, just want to say a massive thank you. Thanks for being with us on our podcast today. Thanks for sharing your enthusiasm and passion for Jesus and for His church. It's been a wonderful pleasure to have you today.
Oh, thanks, Charlie. I'm so honoured. Thank you for having me on.